This is just quite a quick one. I just want to speak a little bit about David Cameron's campaign in the European Union to block Jean-Claude Juncker from becoming the European Commission President. The Independent, which is a paper I usually quote because it's the one I mostly read, has had a headline on this. Basically, it is as follows: UK edges closer to an EU exit as Cameron crushed in bid to block Jean-Claude Juncker's leadership, and it describes it as a humiliation defeat for Cameron. Well, perhaps it is humiliating, but looking at some of the comments on the thread, they're rather predictable. I really get fed up with people who criticise leaders for the sake of doing it. Not because of policy, but for the sake of doing it. And there's all sorts of smug comments on there, mostly from the hard left, but some from the hard right as well. Things like just very childish comments, really, about Cameron being a tosser, a twat, etc. Basically, to quote it word for word. Now, I've always made this point with politicians and leaders in general. It's entirely legitimate to criticise policy. And I would argue in a democracy it's essential that the public can do that. But I get utterly fed up with some of my countrymen and women's attitude towards leaders. The way I see it, Cameron's tried his best here. I mean, to give you a little bit of background, Jean-Claude Juncker is a veteran European technocrat. He's a federalist, which means he ultimately believes in the United States of Europe. Now, David Cameron has worked hard to get a little coalition of European leaders against this appointment, and he has actually had quite a bit of support in Europe from several other leaders. He's went up against Angela Merkel, Europe's most powerful politician, which is awkward to say the least, because overall Cameron and Merkel have quite a good relationship. But I think the British public hugely underestimate just how complex Brussels politics is. Very often the British public are like children, sort of, just pull us out and that's it, which is the UKIP mentality. But it's a lot more complicated than that. I don't want to get into, in this video, about all the rights and wrongs of the European Union. I'm talking purely in personal terms here, the sort of attacks against David Cameron. I often strongly criticise Cameron. There's many areas I can think to criticise him on. Yesterday I spoke about his relationships with Rebecca Brooks and other personnel in the Murdoch empire. I think that is a very bad judgment of Cameron. And I do think he's been out of touch on a lot of issues. But on the European Union, I honestly believe the man has tried his best to get the balance right. Because on one hand, the left say he's pandering to UKIP by taking on the Federalists and sort of taking what they would perceive as an anti-European approach. On the other hand, the right think he's being too soft on Europe. For a British Prime Minister, it was very difficult to get a good balance, and pretty much every British Prime Minister has had this challenge, from Major to Blair to Brown to Cameron. Cameron's arguably done more than any Prime Minister, including Thatcher, to stand up for British sovereignty in Europe. I would argue he's done more than anyone. Now, it's easy for someone like Nigel Farage, who isn't in government, to come out with populist statements. And let's face it, Farage is a very populist politician. He's not, in that sense, he's not really a statesman, because he's taking the easy road. Basically, he's saying what people want to hear, not what is a cold hard reality. From my perspective, Cameron has tried his best to get the balance right. He is standing up for his country by blocking a federalist appointment to the European Commission, whilst not going to the other extreme of saying let's just pull out completely, because he knows that that would not be in the interest of this country. He knows that so many British jobs rely on the European Union. He knows in the long term, we're part of an interconnected world, it would be a mistake. So it pisses me off when people on both the far left and the far right, there was other comments there, by the way, from far right nut jobs, like things I don't even want to repeat, but I will, so you can understand the context. This Muzzy-loving dickhead, referring to Cameron, That's the sort of far right rubbish you come out with, and then some on the hard left just criticise him for the sake of it. And not even sensible criticism, not even criticism about policy, which I can accept, but just childish, infantile slurs. And they basically sound like football hooligans the way they talk. So I don't appreciate it at all, and I don't think it's good for democracy to have this sort of infantile critique. I mean, if you don't like David Cameron, if you think he's wrong on Europe, fine, so criticise him for it. But at least come out with valid criticism, don't just call him names like a spoilt 10-year-old. Yeah, I just think it's ridiculous. I think he's tried his level best. I don't think it's a humiliation, it's a defeat, but David Cameron has tried his best. I mean, in the end of the day, it's very, very hard for any British Prime Minister to really stand up to Brussels, or at least work around Brussels bureaucracy. It's something that needs to change, but I wouldn't fault British Prime Ministers for that. As far as I'm concerned, Cameron has tried his best to get the balance right. So it's unfair, some of the rubbish that people are coming out with. But that's just typical, frankly, of British voters, too many of them. And I know I'm not going to make myself very popular, but I'm so sick and tired of hearing people just slander politicians without looking at bigger issues and without sort of considering the difficult choices they have to make. It's easy to say, oh, Cameron's an idiot, Cameron's this and that. My question is, what would you do in his position? Really? What would you do? They don't have an answer. And I really think it's not a good thing. I think the press encourages it.